Hi, I'm Shay Harper. I'm from Sheldon High School. Just going to introduce us as a group. We're the Short J Environmental Justice Group, and we're here just to talk about what we've been doing and planning.
My name is Emma. I am a senior at Churchill High School. So kind of like what Shay was saying, we've been working together probably since the beginning of summer. That sounds right. As our group, to push the 4J school district to implement a climate literacy education in all grade levels at the appropriate levels. And the fact that we already have mandated climate education in our science curriculum is amazing as it is. And we believe that it's time to take the next steps with that. And so we've been writing letters to the school district and just getting our voices out there and getting people to know who we are and what we want. And we're super happy to be here. And just taking it to the next step.
All right. My name is Maddie Carduna. I'm a senior at South Eugene High School, and I'm going to just share a short story about how climate change has personally affected my life. So each year as the smoke comes, I'm reminded that the fires happen all across not only Oregon, the whole West Coast, and huge swaths of the whole world. And growing up in Oregon, obviously, this was a very normal sight to see, driving to Bend for the weekend or going anywhere that you drive through a forest, you're going to see the trees with no leaves that look like little sad toothpicks. And it's like very easy to see that climate change has a direct impact on our state itself right now, because climate change can cause the brush and undergrowth in forests to be significantly drier, which makes easier for wildfires to spread. As well, climate change can cause extreme weather patterns that can ignite fires or that can cause winds that will cause fires to expand hugely. My whole life, I just expected it every year. I thought it was normal. I thought that this was what my whole life was going to be like every year, just more smoke and more smoke. My education failed to teach me that each year the fires are getting worse and worse, that more land across the country and the entire planet each year is being lost to fires, that along with these fires, that more and more natural disasters are occurring, more flooding is wiping out small towns and cities. In order to be prepared for the world that I am going to live in for the rest of my life, I have the right to be educated on how it's being destroyed and what I can do to help. Even though the climate curriculum has been implemented in 4J schools for the past 5 years, which is an amazing, amazing first step. I can't stress that enough, that we are so grateful that something has been done. I feel that the small education that I received on the subject was not enough for what the reality of my life and what my future will be. My days that were part of the climate education program involved watching a documentary and having a few small discussions on how climate change has affected the planet. But I believe that we must recognize that a comprehensive climate education program that involves all subjects and all grade levels is essential to learning how to function in our world that is ever changing.
All right, I'm gonna share my climate story now. It's kind of in a different style, but I'm gonna start with that, the United Nations has predicted that we have around 10 years before the planet is permanently affected by climate change, and there will be irreversible change. So that means I will be 27 years old when my climate fate is sealed if things keep going the way they're doing. My brother will be 22 and my sister will only be 15. So to start off, growing up, I was an animal lover like most children. And when I learned that animals were going extinct, I wanted to help. I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be a vet or work for National Geographic, just like anything to help. animals. And I think that's when my passion for the environment really started. I went to a charter elementary school in Eugene, and they had a garden club. And in our classes, we were taught to like respect and value our natural environment and previous mistakes people have made harming the environment. But when I went to a middle school in 4J, that level of climate literacy changed, and we didn't really learn much about it except for, the greenhouse gases unit in science. And when I went to high school, it was kind of the same situation in all of my core classes. But fortunately, I had the option of joining international high school program at our high school, which is like a global learning curriculum, and our environmental science pathway at Rachel Carson, which Sarah teaches. And I was able to learn more and more from these. And in all of these instances, you notice that education is what has empowered me to make a change and to get involved in my community. And I'm sure you all know that because you're here right now and you're part of the Oregon Board of Education and you're listening to us. But I notice every summer, like Maddie was saying, that it's getting hotter, and in the winter, even snow and ice storms are becoming more frequent, and the wildfires are getting out of control. And it really makes me worry for the future of my siblings and our generation, because we feel as though kids aren't taught enough climate literacy in every subject, and they're not taught how to be involved and informed. And that really creates a sense of apathy and hopelessness because, they don't really know what to do. That's why I believe climate literacy needs to happen, and it needs to happen really soon so that there's more groups like us taking action and more informed voters. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like this hopelessness has affected me too, to the point, where it feels like I'm afraid to have kids of my own someday or start a family of my own someday, because I don't want them to grow up in a world that, essentially has no future if my fate is gonna be sealed when I'm 27. I don't want to live in a world that's, permanently doomed by that. But I'm also hopeful because we do still have time, but we do have to act fast. And that's why we're all here today, because, we believe that knowledge is power. And I really think we need to empower our children and future generations. Thanks.
So I guess the point of why we wanted to speak to you today is to talk about why it's important to have environmental education in subject areas other than just science classes. I think it's important for students to recognize that science doesn't exist in a vacuum. Science affects the rest of the world, like every other problem we have. So it becomes a social justice issue, an economic issue, a political science issue. And it's only when we make these connections that students can understand the impacts and then create solutions and see the world in a broader view. I took a political science class last year, and there wasn't much environmental education in the class. My teacher had to take it onto himself to provide extra education for us that he felt was necessary, that I felt was very impactful, especially someone who's been very involved in grassroots organizing in Oregon and in the county. There's subjects, like environmental racism, how pollution, air quality affect people of color and low-income people at a much higher rate than other people. And as I was saying before, we need to see these connections in order for our generation to be able to create solutions to these problems. And also, I think we owe it to everyone to realize, that it's not just a scientific problem. We need to make the connection that our political institutions and corporations are responsible for these climate change decisions and see it in a broader view.
Well, I noticed that science really does lend itself to a global understanding and how these issues really relate to everyone around the globe, no matter where you're from, what you do, who you are. It really affects everybody. And learning about these issues can help us learn about other cultures and stuff. So if we were to implement this in history, for example, it would open up a conversation about how this is affecting, for example, people who live on small islands that are flooding and are having to leave their homes to move to a country they've never been to before, and how that can affect their traditions. And this, the NGSS standards from 5 years ago are great, and we're really grateful. Just again to say that we are learning something, but I asked a few of my friends' sisters who are in 5th grade and 8th grade what they have learned so far about climate change, and the answer is not much. The 5th grader watched a documentary and did a few days of work with climate change, and the 8th grader says that she learned almost nothing so far, which I think is pretty sad. And it's kind of hard to notice the changes that are happening without being educated first, like the wildfires that are happening and the slight increases in temperature in the summer and decreases in the winter. You'll just say, oh, that's weird. You're not going to say, this is climate change and it's happening to me. And I think those connections are really important. But because they've only had 3 days, it bears the question, like, how much space is actually built into the curriculum for climate change. And so I've talked to Rich Bowden, he's the Earth and Space Science teacher at Sheldon, and he says that he has trouble fitting in all the content that he has to go through, and also including climate change. He doesn't do the 3-day unit. He spends quite a bit of time on climate change because he recognizes that it's an important issue. But he says he has trouble getting to all the rest of the stuff and keeping up with the schedule that he has to teach without it being built in solidly for a good amount of time. In 8th grade, my teacher, Julie Honemser, who was a great science teacher, really appreciate her. She taught climate change at the very end of the year, and she says how much time she has really depends on what we got through in the beginning of the year. Our class had around 3 days of climate education, and it was mostly just making a board game with like construction paper, markers, and dice, which was fun. And I think it did have a good impact on a lot of students, but I don't think it really had that long-term connection with them that they would think back on when they were in high school and say, hold on, that was climate education. I think they just thought it was a fun game unit. So that bears the question of climate resources that are given to the teachers. We had construction paper and dice, and a lot of the students in this group have expressed feelings that their teachers seemed unprepared to teach the units, and how our units were so short. I've been fortunate to be in IHS, and we've learned a lot more about climate curriculum, and we have become a lot more climate literate since joining the program. But yet again, it's only through documentaries and short little conversations in health and geography that climate change comes up. And I haven't been in Rachel Carson, but I've heard great things about it, which is really encouraging that there is something that is very comprehensive about climate change. And I just wanted to say that if we are going to go into a more rich climate education, students are going to probably start asking the question of what the district is doing to prevent carbon emissions from going into the atmosphere. And so they're going to be wondering, why isn't my school run on solar electricity? Why don't we have trays instead of paper plates and plastic forks and spoons in the cafeteria? And why are there no gardens? And why aren't we learning about anything about stewardship of the earth for gardens? And I think we need to start thinking about that now if we are going to transition, because we should have a plan in place before they start complaining about it, because then that kind of, it sets the groundwork for new programs.
And really quick to note, Melody said in the chat something that I think is an important point. We've been really lucky in our school district that is more progressive that we've gotten this education, but I think teachers have really taken it up on themselves to teach this extra education, and people in more rural communities won't get this quality of education. So I think you guys really have the power to make it more even.
I just want to, oh, sorry, if Melody.
I was just saying I agree.
I was just going to jump in really fast, kind of off of what Brandon was saying. My 3-day unit in Earth and Space Science really showed me that it's not just the students that don't, sorry, it's not just the students that don't have the access to this education. I mean, my experience was that a lot of adults are in the exact same boat, and it's a lot of people don't understand because there's such a heavy taboo on our whole country about the concept of climate change. It's an uncomfortable conversation, and it's hard to bring up, it's hard to talk about. And I really saw that in my Earth and Space Science class, which that was deeply disturbing to me to see in a science classroom. When talking about something with that much weight attached to it, just the disconnect from the emotion and the passion, it was saddening and kind of scary, because on a broader scale, that's what millions of kids are getting, if not less than that. And yeah, it was kind of hard for me to witness that, and that's part of why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about elementary school kids and middle school kids, especially in elementary school, they have one teacher, and those teachers aren't necessarily trained to teach climate education. They aren't trained to teach higher level math. They stick to the things that they know and that they're comfortable teaching. And it needs to be stressed that we need to provide these teachers for younger students and middle school students the resources that they can actively and comprehensively teach these kids, so they understand the world that they're living in and they can find solutions as they get older. In subjects like history and literature, you can look at the historical context and the historical hints that lead to what we are living in today. In the Industrial Revolution, there were countries in Europe that were almost completely unlivable because of the living standards, because of the industrialization. If we start implementing climate literacy and climate education into all core subjects, everything connects, and it really emphasizes the intersectionality of the world right now. You know, everything is connected: economics issues, equity, racial injustice, climate injustice, gender inequality. Everything is connected, and we can't move forwards with anything unless we start with one thing. Everything has to move forward together. And so we have recognized that the ODE has made big strides currently and recently with racial injustice and racial equality. And so if you are passionate and you're working towards that, you also have to work towards climate education. I have so many friends who tell me there's no point in applying to college because I have 10 years and I'm going to go to college for 4 of them, and then I'm going to be in debt until, you know, the world ends. That's heartbreaking to hear. So if we can really implement this kinds of climate education so people start finding solutions and start feeling like they have hope, then I don't think I will have as many friends who tell me that there's no point.
I wanted to add something as well. I'm Naviksha. I'm from Sheldon. And I think, like, as of right now, we always think about politicians who are going to change our society, push for the betterment of everything going on, especially with climate change. The biggest way we can actually combat climate change and make the biggest impact so that we actually get things done is by educating the youth and starting from there. Because whenever you have a system that directly impacts youth through education, I think we can really make a big difference by educating them, just so that they grow up. And even as of right now, like we're doing, we actually try to push for change because we can't always expect politicians to do so.
You know, I think Nabisha's right about how we need to start the youth. We need to have this education throughout all like the grade levels, so that there'd be less pressure on like one teacher in one grade to to like shove down all the climate stuff down students like throats, whatever. But like having it over the years, it'd be easier for teachers because they can work with each other and plan out and make it less for each other, but it's still a lot because it's all together adding up. And then having it over the years as well, it will be more of an impact. It will be long term. It's like, it's like learning a habit of, memory.
I want to talk a little bit more about intersectionality and what that would look like with comprehensive climate education. So it is no secret that everything is connected, that POC communities are disproportionately affected by climate change. Look at Flint, Michigan, look at climate refugees, that gender equality and economic equality are connected, inequality, sorry, that, climate change affects everyone, but people below the poverty line and lower class people much more. And so when we start implementing comprehensive climate literature, we are also implementing comprehensive climate education and comprehensive racial education and economic education for all students so that they can all better understand the issues that are facing our world. And also, instead of just knowing what's going on, figure out solutions. Because a lot of the climate education or racial education that I've received, or friends have received, or my little sister has received, has been saying what has happened, but nothing ever about what we can do to fix it. And I think that really adds to the hopelessness that my generation is feeling. I talked to my little sister recently about some of the education she's received on racial injustice and climate education. And she told me that it was hard to listen to what they were talking about because it made her sad, because she didn't know what could be done. She just got piled on with all of this negative and no idea of what to move forward with. She had no idea what she could do to help, and it overwhelmed her. When we are educated, we are able to find solutions, and we are able to be hopeful, and we are able to push for change, and we are able to make the world we're living in a better place. Without that, we're all stuck in this hopeless dark. And it's hard to move forward, and it's hard to live and be a kid when you're weighed down by the pain and the fear of the future.
Kind of adding on to what Adia was saying, I think that as adults, it's really important to realize the long-term effects that this fear that most of my generation feels is going to have on our lives and our mental health throughout our whole lives. Growing up in an environment of constant stress, of am I even going to be here in 30 years? Is my country going to be okay? Or is Florida going to be underwater? Is like, are people going to be displaced into my home? It's a constant fear, and it's a constant stressor. And I think that it's really important to recognize that people that grow up with this constant stress in life, they're going to have different reactions through their adulthood and their adult life. And I think that's why it's really important to start climate education at such a young age, so it's not such a fearful thing. It's not something that your teacher is saying to you, climate change is happening in 10 years and there's nothing we can do about it. Deal with it. That's not what we're asking for. We really need teachers that are able to teach us with hope, that are able to teach us how to make our planet a better place. And again, just like Adia was saying, that comes from a place of knowledge, and that comes from a place of not only us having a comprehensive education, all of our teachers and staff members having a comprehensive education, so that they can be a part of our growing up, that they can be a part of realizing this stress, this burden that is constantly on most of the people that are younger, that so that we can have a community and a support system that helps us get through high school, that helps us become the change that we want to see in the world.
I just want to thank Tana and Darren and all of the teachers that have worked with us, because they've been just so supportive and amazing, and just bringing us all together in this. Like yeah, having adults like that is so important.
I don't think there's a single student in our group who is old enough to vote. So we really need our adults to support us and speak for us and be our advocates, because, you know, this is our future. Like Melody said, I'll be 27 when my climate fate is sealed. And so I'm really counting on you guys and the adults and the teachers in my life to please advocate for me and my future and my little sister's future.
I'm going to talk about real quick about how comprehensive climate education in other places has already had substantial effects. A study by San Jose State University showed that after taking a year-long intensive course on climate change, 90% of students recycled more, 75% donated products, 64% buy products with less packaging, 48% compost, 86% changed to energy efficient light bulbs, 59% purchased energy saving appliances, 18% purchased renewable energy from utility companies, 4% installed solar panels, 35% used public transportation more often, 31% purchased a gas efficient car, 26% bike instead of using car, 22% carpool regularly, 7% purchased a hybrid or electric vehicle, and 83% of participants said that they have personally experienced the effects of climate change. And obviously a lot of these things are like not classist, but they're privileges to be able to afford these type of things. So it's not the best representation of data, but it is data that shows that this does work, and it leads to more informed decisions when you educate people on these things.
Yeah, that study showed what people had taken a year-long course. Imagine the effects of someone who is educated in climate literacy from kindergarten till senior year. Imagine the power and the knowledge they would hold, and imagine the informed decisions they would make.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that their little small actions of recycling that tin can or recycling that plastic container don't really have a big impact, and that's where they're wrong, is the thing. I think people need to be educated more to realize that every little piece has a big impact. And if more people are educated that way, they'll realize that they need to make a change in their lives, like the data shows. And the more people that make those changes, the more effect that these small actions have. And pretty soon it's like a snowball. It just keeps getting bigger, and it keeps growing, and it keeps having a bigger effect on our planet.
We really want to thank you guys for taking the time to meet with us. We really look forward to connecting again at some point soon to discuss what we can do further. We really want to recognize the strides you have already made to make climate literacy prevalent in Oregon schools. So thank you again for making the time to speak with us.
Yeah, and it's important to note that there are so many teachers and students who would be there to support you if this was something you wanted to pursue further. There's so many teachers and also students we've talked to that are so excited for something like this to happen and are just waiting to help you out. And there's also a lot of models of places who have already implemented similar climate education that could make it easier to go forward with this.
I just want to say thank you so much for pushing on systems. So know that adults on this call and at the national level hear you and see you with this work. So
if the students could share experiences that they've had with educators who were able to create these anti-racist spaces where they were able to talk about very openly and respectfully about power, privilege, those sorts of concepts, because we know that this is intersectional work, and I think that can trip people up almost as much as the politics around climate justice or climate change can trip people up almost as much as not knowing how to talk about race and socioeconomics and the intersectional identities. So what experiences have you all had with people who are able to do that really well? Like, what was it that they did? How did they do run their classrooms? Like, what did they do?
I had an educator when I was in 8th grade, and we knew the day that we were talking about racial injustice. We knew it beforehand so we could mentally and emotionally prepare for the heavy kinds of conversations. But she started off the conversation with guidelines saying that this was a safe space, and if you were uncomfortable, you could leave. But if you were insensitive, that there would be major consequences. So she really made students and POC in the room feel really safe. And I feel comfortable saying that because I had discussions with my classmates afterwards. But she set up the conversation to feel like a conversation and to feel like everyone knew they were heard and everyone knew they were respected. And I think that's a very important, it was courageous conversations. I think it's important to make sure that when you're having these types of discussions, to make it be a discussion and make sure that you're protecting the students and make sure that everyone feels heard and respected and protected.
Our chemistry teacher is super into politics, and he does tell a lot of stories as well. And so during class, I mean, he does teacher lessons, but like it's not really a strict like curriculum because he's teaching chemistry, but because of his passion for politics and equality within our nation and the world, he does include a lot of little stories here and there talking about how racism and sexism and all these other forms of discrimination are constantly in his life. And he like brings up stories like how whenever he was getting his new house, the neighborhood had like a guideline from a couple of decades ago that was really, really racist. And he just kind of talks about like the privileges he has and like how what ways he took during those events to kind of combat it and his concerns. And so I think even whenever you're not in a set curriculum, talking about these issues, if teachers are really putting their opinions and their experiences from day-to-day life into their curriculums and their lessons, I feel like that does have a big impact.
What Nia said in the chat about a history teacher having 20 minutes of class for discussions, I think like a time set like that is great. In my history class last year, we would watch CNN 10, and then after that we would watch we would discuss anything about it or anything we wanted to really express about the news segments. And every so often there were news segments about the environment or like some kind of impact or whatever. And I think it was really, I don't know how to describe it, like just impactful, I guess. I just found it really comfortable in that class to watch something about it and then discuss it openly for like almost like an hour sometimes. And there was some debates and everything, but it helps me understand what other students think about it and how I can adjust and talk to them. One thing though is that I want to like, for a different class that I had, it wasn't really a class, but there's this teacher, and I'm not gonna say who, but like there comes a point like where politics sometimes they get in the way of talking about the climate change, and I understand that politics is definitely a way to it's like a pathway for climate change to happen, but at the same time talking about it sometimes when talking about climate change is quite difficult because some people let it get in the way of like parties and everything. They let that get in the way of science, and when science is factual and politics is like not factual, it's like not science, and then like they let that get in the way of discussing what really matters. And so I feel like there needs to be a balance between talking about, you know, parties and politics and then talking about science and climate change as well.
I think that if we're talking about creating a safe space, to talk about, both climate change and racial equality, um, for me, that those spaces have been really far and few between. It really comes from a place of not having people of color at my school and not having pretty much any people of color educators. Through my entire K through 12 experience, I think I have had one person of color as an educator. And I think that, it obviously comes from historical racism in Oregon. And I think that it's super important that we talk about why we are experiencing those things. And I think that it's really hard to create a safe space to talk about anything if you're not aware of your past and what got you to this place. But as well as that, I think that it's super important that we don't just, someone brought this up in the past, that we don't just talk about it in the past context. A lot of the stuff I have learned about racial inequality has not been about what's going on today. It's been about, learning about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, which is incredibly important, obviously, but it's really important that we're also learning about what is happening today. That can also be tied into climate change, because you can look, a lot of what I learned about climate change can be, I learned about Greenpeace, and I learned about, fracking and how bad it was, and like sometimes how it started wars. But I haven't learned anything about how climate change has impacted my life right now today. And I think that it's really important that we have a forward look at things, not just being stuck in the past, while also being aware of our past. And I think that the only way to do that is to have this K through 12 education, where you have the time to do it. So it's not just stuck on you as soon as you hit 7th grade. Oh, that's when they're old enough to learn about racism. And it's like, I think that it's really important that we learn about racism and climate education when we're 5, when we're 6, because it doesn't just affect you once you hit 7th grade. It's going to affect you for your whole life, no matter what you do. So I just think it's really important that we have both aspects.
And if we have a comprehensive education like that, the building blocks can be provided when people are younger, and then by the time they get to high school, we can have these more complex conversations where people are educated enough to have a comfortable and safe conversation about these topics. And, then we can look back and say, okay, this is what has happened. And then we have the time to say, so what can we do about it? Where can we go from here? And how can it impact your future career, things you want to do in the future, things you're inspired by, and want to help.
I think that's these are all such great points. And it's where, being an educator for a very long time, there is this sort of fear that teachers have of what they can or cannot say. And it is very hard to not put your opinion in. And so some people they feel like they are not able to do that. So then they choose to not talk about things at all. And frankly, we all are in a different, trajectory of our journey with our anti-racist way of being on this planet. And so it is like we acknowledge that there's just so much work to do. But a big piece of what I appreciate these students saying to you is the teacher, like training and elevating the teacher so that they can really actually do this justice. No pun intended, but it really, the kids just deserve so much more from us.
The reason I asked about the video, so I was going to lead into exactly where Nicole went on the anti-racist climate justice space. So just so everyone on this call knows, we do have connections to national levels, and these are the conversations we've been taking place for quite some time. This is at the core of my essence. So a previous life, I worked with NASA on climate science work. And so it is, what you're bringing forth is really what we hope to elevate moving forward. So I'm glad you planted the seed that we may be able to call on you in the near future. There is an a group of science folks at the national level who are working on exactly some of these components. But I think student voice is really important once the adults get out of the way on some level and help us elevate your voice and your concerns and lead in that way. So that's where like the video might be a first planting of a seed of like, hey, we have some students who might be able to advocate in ways that sometimes when adults start to talk, some of us tune out, but when student voice comes through, just because of the passion that you bring with that and the real impacts it's going to have on your livelihood, on our livelihoods, but also on your livelihoods, helps us to elevate and spark some interesting conversations, important and critical conversations. I have job-alike positions nationally. So Washington has a state science specialist, California. So we all come together and it's called the Council of State Science Supervisors. So we meet in I meet weekly on access and equity. So I'm on an ad hoc committee that I co-chair, and social justice, racial justice is that sort of through line. But we've recently started working with the NAACP climate justice work to help elevate all of these concerns on how climate is really impacting at disproportional rates our communities of color. And so that's sort of what we're talking about, and then how we can embed that in a historically white dominated field. And so how we can change that, disrupt that narrative of being more inclusive in that space for all students, all educators, and feeling welcome. So we can get into some of the more complexities of what that looks like, but that's just some of the initial stages where we're at right now. I do think that this is a topic that's just hopefully going to continue to elevate. Yesterday, I was on a webinar as well with Dr. Terrell. I think his last name was Terrell Morel. I think there was that naming from the University of Missouri, talking about his lived experience as a man of color, particularly a Black man of color working in spaces. And so how we're trying to change that narrative. So these conversations definitely help to keep the foot on the accelerator for sure.
Well, we are very grateful that you guys took the time to sit with us for an hour and listen to what we have to say. We're really looking forward to moving forward with this. So if you need anything else from us, we are all ready and excited to move forward and get this going. So thank you guys so much for meeting with us.
You are welcome. It's definitely a bright spot in my week for sure. We don't often get to see the students we used to work with. Most of us came from the classroom. So anytime we have students in our space, it's a wonderful day for sure. Thank you.
And I just want to piggyback on what Jamie said. Thank you so much for having us today. We are very privileged to have this time with you. And I just want to thank you for your courage, because it does take a lot of courage to come and talk with us at the state level. And we appreciate everything that you shared and the vulnerability that you showed with us today in sharing your thoughts and your stories and your lived experience. So thank you again. And I'm really looking forward to our next conversation about this.
And I would like to echo what Noelle was just saying. I'm Susan Holbeck, the Program Administrator for Science at Portland Public Schools. I work with Nicole Berg on the climate justice, climate change in Portland Public. And I cannot tell you how much we value the student voice, and as adults being listeners, so we can be learners from your experience. And I do appreciate how willing you were to share your experience and your learnings with us so we can change the system that we adults have created. And just very, very thankful to be here today as well.
I just want to say thank you again. This has been really encouraging, and it's been a really great positive experience for me. So thank you guys for taking the time.
Thank you again. Yeah, it's we're all really, really excited to keep moving forward with this and have the state backing us up. So thank you guys again.
Yeah, thank you. It feels really awesome to like actually have your voice heard instead of talking into a void. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we're all really excited to, make a change.
Thank you guys again for carving this time out with us. We look forward to meeting and connecting with you guys again.
Thank you. We do too.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.